there's a plane that flies overhead, and I'd heard about this.
Hold on, real quick, Stefan. Hold on, we just
we're going too far.
Well, no, we ran into a snag. Hold on.
Welcome back to Tac Ops. I'm Greg. I'm here with Eric, as always. Today we have on Steffan Watkins. He is an OSINT consultant. It's a real interesting episode we have coming up. I don't have a lot of questions. But first, our sponsor for this podcast, the Commando Store. They've been a real loyal, real good podcast. Is anyone hearing this right now?
I'm hearing this.
Yeah, it says audio stream current bitrate 0. Lower than the recommended bitrate. Yeah, 0 would be lower than the recommended, wouldn't it? Podcast. Commando Store. They've been a real loyal. Anyway, so back to the Commando Store. Great sponsor. They're an online military surplus store. They have everything. A lot of Cold War stuff. Eric and I were just talking about them. A lot of real interesting products. Hat, boots, all different types of stuff. Go over there and check them out. CommandoStore.com. Commando with a K. Store.com. You get 5% off your first order if you use our coupon code Tac Ops at checkout. All lowercase, no space. We'll have the link down in the description. It's CommandoStore.com. All right, Stefan, thanks for being with us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Maybe if you want to start out, just for maybe some people who might not know who you are.
Whether that's tracking the movements of the HMCS Fitzgerald. I was going to say Fitzgerald.
The Calgary, maybe?
And when I can, I try and make that a career. So whether this all sort of started from my interest in Cold War history. And there's a lot of American history that's very well documented from the Cold War, from Korea, from World War II. But in Canada, I think most of the information, most of the history out there is focused on Korea and before. And there's not a lot about the Canadian Cold War effort, which was substantial. I mean, we had long-range radar sites, the DEW line, the Mid-Canada line. There were bow marks up here as well as, of course, many more down south. We've been buying a lot of American military equipment for a long time. The Voodoos, the air-to-air missile or rocket, the Genie. We've been big customers up here, so there's a lot of history. And when I was down south in Albuquerque, I visited Sandia National Labs. And when I got there, I didn't really have a concept of what a significant place that was to the Manhattan Project. So when I started to look up facilities there, I got really interested and thought, there's got to be places like this in Canada or something like this from the Cold War, old vestiges of bases. And so I started to look up what I could. And in order to try and figure out where, if you want to go way down the conspiracy rabbit hole and you start to wonder, is there a secret military base in a mountain, or is there some secret military base in the Nevada desert? Who would know? Well, the aliens or the lizard people that control the government. But other than that, maybe the Russians. So if the Russians are coming over with some sort of a spy plane or something that you hear about in the news, what are they looking at? And then I found out about this Open Skies Treaty stuff, and I was like, well, okay, the Russians are coming over in an observation capacity to double check that the Americans are doing what they say they're doing or not doing, what they shouldn't be, as far as weapons development or massing troops at a border or preparing a fleet of secret ships or something. So this is more of a verification than it is spying, because the cameras on these planes are treaty limited to only 30 centimeter resolution. But anyway, my point was that if the Russians are coming over and looking at our bases, if there was a secret base that they knew about, they would be overflying it. So if I could figure out where they were flying, then I could know where the secret base is. That's where they keep the lizard people. But so this is my premise, and it worked great. So I did the Canadian version of the Freedom of Information Act, which is the Access to Information Act, and I got all the flight plans, or about 12 years of them, from the Canadian military of what the Russians were overflying in Canada. And unfortunately, I cannot say that there's any.
We might have had a double internet failure there. This is no good. Oh, now he disappeared again.
He just sent me a message that says, "Goddamn."
This is a little more than frustrating. Running health checks.
All right.
All right. I think we both failed there. I don't know if you failed, but we failed. Maybe you failed.
I don't know.
It might be them lizard people.
I'm back. It's the lizard people.
Yeah, that's what it
So
is.
where
It's
did
the
I
Russians
drop
shutting
off?
us down, right?
It was right around lizard people.
You're right around the second lizard people, right?
go,
So there's
gotta go.
no
The
second
lizard
one,
people
yes.
in the middle of
You didn't find
Manitoba.
them. Yeah.
Didn't find them, but they were looking at all the sites that I was interested in as far as Cold War sites, which is how I realized what they were looking at. They were going from radar base to radar base, because if you were going to build a anti-ballistic missile site or something in secret in northern Canada, you'd probably build it near the rail. You need to have an existing airport. You need to have some existing infrastructure, and
Right.
we're better to do that than an old base that still has the highway there, that still has the rail and all that. And those were the sort of bases that I went to. And I took lots of pictures and everything, and a lot of those bases are just crumbling into the ground. They've been mostly remediated. Some of them have been totally remediated, but it's kind of cool to go up there and see what they would have seen, because there's not a lot has changed up there. There's just bush. So, you see the same kind of forest, you get the same kind of bugs, and you wonder, what the hell were they doing up here? And you read the old historical accounts of them taking care of the mosquitoes, they used to oil the swamps so that they wouldn't have mosquitoes. I don't know that they can get away with that anymore, but
that's awesome.
Yeah, you read all sorts of horrifying accounts. But anyway, so that was why I was digging through that, and it accomplished its purpose, because I was able to tell that they were looking at these Cold War sites. I was looking at the right stuff myself. Then whether it's planes or whether it's ships, it's the planes transponders that I'm following, or ship transponders are pretty much the same thing. I mean, very similar anyway. So that kind of led to an interest in following Russian ships and figuring out where they were going.
Huh.
So we wanted to talk about tracking military ships specifically, right? So if we want to roll into AIS, right? So the Automated Identification System, which is I don't even know what it is. I'm assuming it's just some kind of small transponder you put on your ship, and it will send out a signal to, I guess, a satellite. Maybe you can explain a little bit better how the transponder actually works.
Yeah, it could either be by VHF radio. It runs on, I can't remember which Marine VHF channel, but it is on Marine VHF. So if you know how far your Marine VHF radio can usually reach, I don't remember whether that's 100 miles or what, but whatever that is as far as you would then get that signal from another ship, if that ship was transmitting. So normally, ship to ship, you would have these transponders, and you would then spot or get additional information on your radar picture of that ship from the AIS transponder. But if you are close to shore, there are hobbyists that are running receivers that are capturing that data as well, and then funneling it up to services like marinetraffic.com. So marinetraffic.com will send you for free a receiver so that you can contribute to the global network of marinetraffic.com receivers, and everyone can see the yachts, the tankers, the container ships, the military ships, if they're transmitting offshore. This is really handy at choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, of course, or the Straits of Dover, or down near Singapore. I can't remember. Strait of Malacca? Down there. Anywhere that there's a pinch point is a great spot to have a receiver.
Right. So the straits generally, so they'll send it to anybody in the world, not just anybody in the United States or Canada. They'll send them everywhere. Oh, wow, that's cool. Anywhere. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you just go on their website and apply, or how does that work?
Yep. I can't remember under which menu it is, but there's a menu there that says, do you want to host your own receiver? And you say yes.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, so a lot of the stuff you see on Marine Traffic comes from these kind of hobbyists putting out transponders, generally near straits, I would assume, like the Strait of Hormuz or any choke point like that, right?
Exactly. Or whether you're near a harbor and you're interested in seeing what's coming and going. If you're around Florida, there's lots of there's military bases everywhere, as far as I can tell, in the States. So, and if you can see the water, if you can see the ocean, you should probably have a receiver so that you could see a little further than what you already know.
Right. So there is no real requirement. It's not like a license plate. You don't have to have that to go out to sea. It's an additional thing. If you're a ship, if you're a captain, you can throw it on your ship and say, hey, this is going to kind of help me out being safe-wise because people know where I'm at. What are the requirements for AIS? Why do people need it?
I can't remember the name of the legislation, but basically internationally, if you are traveling in a ship of a certain size, and I mean yacht size or super tanker size, anything above a certain length, or maybe it was a certain tonnage, you have to have an AIS transponder. What kind of AIS transponder depends on whether you're running a big commercial ship or whether you have a smaller ship. So you have a Class A transponder and a Class B transponder, which is the smaller transponder. The Class A transponder broadcasts all the information that you could think of that, say, a rescue effort or some form of law enforcement would want to know about the ship. Is it highly flammable? How many, let's say, how laden is it? Is it heavily laden with oil or is it empty? What kind of cargo it's carrying? If it's a cargo ship, is it explosive cargo or is it inert? All those sorts of details are being broadcast at an interval from that transmitter, telling everybody around it it's business. So you know where it's going, you know where it's coming from, what flag it is, what its name is, some unique identifiers. You know as much as is reasonable to broadcast. Government agencies, say Border Patrol, Navies, Coast Guards, will turn off those transponders so they aren't seen by drug runners or whatever their situation is for OPSEC reasons. So with militaries globally, everybody has a different angle on this. Some of the countries are extremely secretive or don't use it at all. Some of the countries put up bogus information, like a bogus name, but the right identifier number. So then you can try and figure out based on the number what the ship is. And then a lot of the U.S. Navy ships kind of do it that way, where it'll say U.S. warship as the name, but then it'll have a unique number. That unique number isn't that unique. They can change it whenever they want. So, you can only, you got to take it with a grain of salt. So the other day, I can't remember which submarine it was, but one of the submarines popped up in Scotland, one of the American submarines, and I thought it was one submarine, but I'm like, well, I was sure that was near San Diego. So how did it end up in Scotland? And sure enough, they'd changed the numbers, and I was wrong, and that wasn't the sub that was there at all. But then you just have to kind of monitor the news, find out, monitor the press releases from the U.S. Navy, try and figure out which ships are where, and you can match up the numbers if they're using unique numbers.
The U.S. Navy loves their photo ops too. I know, just from my own experience, looking through different sites, you could pretty much, at least all the carriers, a lot of the destroyers and stuff as well, but you can pretty much find out a general area of any of the aircraft carriers at any given time. They have photos almost every single day. So that will probably help out a lot too, right?
Exactly. You get an idea of where they are, and then you take a look at some of the pictures, what's in the background. Do you see mountains? Do you see ocean? Do you see whatever? And you kind of pare it down that way, and then you can maybe match up where the last location was of that ship, maybe a day ago when they went dark, and then say, okay, well, how far could they have traveled in a day? And then you get an idea of, of proximity. So there's lots of information that is given away and that some people get very anxious about. They're like, well, why would you publish this on Twitter? People will know. The bad guys will know. Guess what? The bad guys already knew. If some guy in Ottawa, me, can find this stuff online, everybody else can. I'm not doing anything special.
Right. That's the interesting thing about OSINT, right? Is it's open source. Anybody can pull this shit up, right? It's not about. It's just another, but it's another tool in the toolbox, right? So it's not just you shouldn't follow it definitely, but you, like you said, you could take this and you could also pair it to, let's say, DVID's Hub, right? DVID's Hub is an awesome U.S. military website that is ran by the PAOs, right? The public affairs officers. So it's all open source. It's available to anybody. You can post it online. They won't sue you or anything crazy like that, right? But you take AIS, you take this, you take maybe satellite imagery, right? And me and Greg have talked about how you could there's been YouTubers that have gotten robbed and stuff like that. They've gotten attacked because you can just look at their YouTube channel and watch them pan across their backyard, and with their backyard images you can pick up their satellite image and pick up where they live, right?
Oh yeah, geolocate it.
Right.
Yeah. I've done that a few times, just trying to figure out where people live. It might sound a little creepy, but at the same time, I mean, it's fun, right? You were just talking about ships. Like if there's a mountain in the background, maybe you can figure out what kind of mountain it is. Is it a famous mountain? Is it have any distinguishing attributes about it that you might be able to locate that image based on that mountain? I love doing that just for fun. Like I'll find a YouTube video of somebody driving around their neighborhood, and then for fun I'll just try to figure out exactly where it is. And I won't do anything with the information. I'm not going to show up at their house or anything like that.
Yeah.
But
no, it's a curiosity.
It is, yeah. It's like a puzzle.
But that was one of the things I wanted to talk about AIS, is using it kind of for nefarious purposes, right? So you could take specifically as a submariner, right? The Navy always taught us, don't talk about when you're leaving, don't tell your wife when you're leaving. I mean, you can only tell maybe your family up to a certain point, but don't talk about it online, don't do this, don't do that. We don't want people to know that the ships are leaving, because when it comes to specifically submarines and carriers, they don't maneuver very well coming in and out of port, right? So if you're coming in and out of port and everybody knows that you're coming in and or going out, you can easily be attacked by a small craft vessel with a bunch of boxes tied to the top of it with explosives or whatever bullshit, right? So,
right, exactly.
What do you see as kind of the nefarious purposes of using AIS and these open source intelligence ways to gather information?
So usually people sort of say, well, what about the coal? And, well, the coal didn't have AIS. The coal was pre-AIS. They may have had something else. I mean, they would have been radioing, the local authority, the port authority, calling for a pilot vessel, that sort of thing. But what I usually say is if you're in a port town in the Middle East, in Africa, that's a hub of commerce, and it's a major money maker for the entire community. Whether you're trucking water or gasoline or containers or working at a local, food establishment or whatever, there's a lot of people involved and who need to be prepared for a ship to arrive and are in the know. I bet anybody in Djibouti could tell you when the next American ship was coming in the next week. Because it's their business to know, because they're going to need to have the food prepared, they're going to need to have the supplies there, they're going to need to have the facilities ready for whatever is arriving. So I don't think that AIS for say an Al-Qaeda-like organization is critical. I think they already know when things are coming in. I think they can do it with very limited resources. I think they could use AIS, but I think they would know anyway. So playing around with AIS is not as critical to operational security as typical human intelligence kind of operation security. Like you said, don't tell people in the port where you're going next, right, or that sort of thing, because you may be able to slip the ship out in the middle of the night, but the Russians are still going to be able to detect the ship from space, or with their ship that's also in port, or the container ship that's actually doubling as a spy ship. There's so many other ways other than AIS that a ship could be at risk. I just think that the importance of AIS for operational security is often overinflated, because they need to broadcast on AIS when they come in and out of ports a lot of the time, and that gives away their position right there. When they arrived, when they left. You can't leave a Spanish port without having a pilot vessel, and that pilot vessel is probably going to need the ship to have AIS on, and that's just the rules. So they can't really hide.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with Planet. They have all the Dove satellites, those small satellite CubeSats. So they have a few larger ones too, but they provide imagery for decently inexpensive. I mean, $800 a month, at least when I last checked, and you can see anywhere on Earth. Like every single day, yesterday, even today, later on in the day, you can see what the image looked like, and you could spot ships almost. I'm not sure if they provide the open ocean, but definitely around ports and stuff, and you can see stuff. And
it goes out. I can't remember how many miles out, but usually it's around the coast, and if you're in an archipelago, kind of some kind of delta or something, it may go out a little further.
Right. Yeah.
And Planet imagery is fantastic. Their usual CubeSat stuff is 3-meter imagery.
Right.
And that's good enough to be able to identify a ship. Not good enough to identify what kind of car somebody's driving, but fantastic for ships, tankers, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're large enough where you can spot that. And that might be a little bit out of our price range, but if you're talking about a terrorist group or North Korea or something, they can definitely afford that. And they can see, okay, there's a carrier docked at the U.S. Naval Base, Yokosuka, and outside of Tokyo there.
Absolutely.
Whether or not it's there or not. So you have the same problem there, right? Similar, I guess, to AIS. You mentioned the McCain. You said that was they did not have AIS on at the time, right? Or that was even before they had it installed?
I'm not McCain. I'm not actually sure. I know that I didn't see it on marinetraffic.com, if I remember correctly. I think that was why I couldn't really comment on that, because I couldn't see the whole collision. Whereas with the Fitzgerald, you could see at least the ship, the civilian ship side. From the McCain, I don't think I could see either side. And that doesn't mean it wasn't transmitting. It just means that it was out of range of those shore-based receivers.
Huh.
I don't remember if McCain had been transmitting. I don't think so, but I don't remember.
Did that have any impact on AIS policy in the U.S. Navy that you know of? I thought I read an article one time about how it required them to now be turning on AIS every time they're within range of at least a port.
Yeah, when they're going through narrows, I can't remember how they framed it. Basically, it was high traffic areas, pinch points, where there'll be lots of other traffic. They were directed, and this was actually not Navy-wide. It was per fleet. Per fleet, each admiral was told to go away and figure out a plan that suited their fleet. And I don't know if they work together on this or not. It doesn't seem to be applied the same way exactly throughout the Navy, so I'm not sure what the different schools of thought are there. People often tell me, well, Steph, you don't know what the operational, requirements, or you don't know what the documentation says. You don't know what they're doing. I say, I don't need to know what they're doing. I'm seeing what they're doing. So whether it's that I have an impression that they're acting different or that they are acting different, I'm seeing them act different. Whether it's the same playbook or different playbooks, I don't think it matters. But point is, the different parts of the Navy seem to be acting differently and nonsensically. So like I said, sometimes they'll switch around the numbers, but they'll name the ship Warship 53 or something. And somebody can tell me what, DDG 53 is. I don't remember off the top of my head. But, you can put it together. Like if a ship's identity or the number has been fudged to say 9999999 to mask the identity of the ship, but then they call it, Destroyer 53, I can guess what it is. Like that's not hiding the identity. That's just being lazy. So, I don't know. I don't see. Let me contrast. So people say, "Oh, you're crapping a lot on the U.S. Navy." Okay, I do, but that's because I look at the Canadian Navy or the German Navy or the Australian Navy, and they all do the same thing, and they use the real name of the ship most of the time. I think even the Australians, HMCS Calgary or HMCS Charlottetown or whatever. They have a unique number that they always use for the transponder, per the international agreements, just like a civilian ship. And if they're in some sort of a hot sort of area with whether it's terrorism or they're stalking Russian subs or whatever, they turn off their AIS transponder or they go to an encrypted mode where only the other ships can see. It's that simple. They don't need to fudge the name. They don't need to change the number. And it's clearly not a threat to their operational security because that's how they're conducting their business every day. And it's not a problem for the Canadians or the Germans. So why is it a problem for the U.S. Navy? I don't know.
What about Russia and China? Do they operate with AIS, or do they show up on there, or do they kind of have their own rules about it? Oh, we lost him again.
Yeah, I think Steffan's got he's got that Canadian internet. I don't know what they're on up there. It's probably worse at AT&T, right?
Hey, but when we did the episode at your house last week, that was pretty good.
Yeah, it was.
We had with Greg Kursick. That was a fun episode.
Yeah, we love talking about Greg. So one of the things we're gonna do while we wait for Steffan to come back is we're gonna do little clips. So whenever we do a long 2-hour podcast like this, we're going to clip together some of the highlights of the shows, like when Greg talked about drawing dicks all over the nuke. Like that little story is amazing. And so we don't want people to just have to dig through 2 hours of us talking about bullshit. We want to kind of give them the highlights and stuff. So I think that'll help us out a little bit. And so we're going to do that. And then when it comes to the schedule, so we're going to be having a lot more interviews coming up. So we've got Ryan Baronclough from Strategic Sentinel is going to be on next week. And then we got Sutton, the amazing Covert Shores, is going to be on again.
Oh, we're going to have him on again?
Yeah.
I forgot that you told me that.
Yeah, and
I'm looking forward to that one again.
It'll be his third show. Our second show actually got lost. It's a lost episode somewhere. So we're going to talk to Sutton. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and talk to... we have some random guests. We haven't locked down yet, but we have maybe a Russian OSINT, maybe an Iraqi soldier. So it'll be
you want to get out other perspectives. A lot of the people we've interviewed have been American
and
right?
Navy,
and you want to get other perspectives too,
right.
which I think is extremely, extremely important. Oh, he was there, now he dropped back out again. But the Sutton one, I'm really excited for that one. I can't believe that. Oh, man. So, if you guys don't know the story, we recorded an entire podcast with H.I. Sutton on Skype. This is back when we used Skype. And you record the podcast on Skype. You record the audio there. And after a while, when you're done, you hang up, you hit... Oh, you're there?
Yep.
All right. So, I was asking... So I was asking you, I think what I asked you was about Russia and China in regards to AIS.
So China's Coast Guard, some of them show up. Their Navy, not so much. Their science and research ships, whether they're doing science and research, I'm not sure. But the satellite tracking ships with those big dishes that show up in Australia and Fiji and that, they usually show up. They're not shy about their presence. In fact, they're trying to exert their dominance over the South China Sea, so they want some of their Coast Guard ships to show up. The Russian subs don't ever show up. Some of the Russian fleet is some of the more modern stuff, and I think that's as new ships get rolled out, they're coming by default with AIS, and then it's up to the politicians to figure out whether or not or admirals to figure out whether or not they turn it on or not. But like the Yantar, the research ship / intelligence ship, they do use their transponder, and you can follow around where they go and where they stop, and then try and hypothesize what it is that they're stopping over.
Right, that was a big thing back in the day, right? They talked about the Yantar coming off the coast of North Carolina and spying on us and listening to our radio or whatever they were doing, right?
Yeah.
We listened to American radio.
It was like straight out of a movie. So it was. There was the Victor Leonov, there was the Nikolai Chaiker, and the Yantar. So Yantar was a different year than Victor Leonov, and it came down off the coast. And I think it was quoted in the Free Beacon about that one because I'd heard it was near the coast, and to me, near the coast means near the coast, not 300 kilometers or like 200 plus miles. That's not near. That's far. Grover taught me that, and near and far is very dear to me. But
it's all relative, right? Everything's relative
exactly.
in the grand scheme of things, as my dad always told me.
Closer to this side than the other side.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So anyway, the Yantar came tootling down, and you could see where it stopped, and then you could zoom in on those spots and figure out, okay, well, what's there? Is there at the edge of some sort of underwater feature, like a mountain or a shipwreck or whatever? And I found that it was coinciding with surveys that were done by the NOAA. So they would stop at a what we call a bathymetric survey spot that you could then look up on the NOAA site. And they would stop for maybe a day or so, and then they'd move on. So you wonder, well, why are they stopping at these sites? Maybe this survey was to lay down a cable, say, hypothetically. But the cable isn't actually, it isn't shown, and a lot of these NOAA trips were, for under government grants and, various other programs, potentially for the Navy, say, who may then send out the U.S. Naval Service Zeus, say, to lay cable or sensors or who knows what. So I couldn't figure out many of these places were not along known transatlantic commercial data cables, not the usual AT&T cables, but they could be other military cables. And in the initial leaks from the Pentagon about this, they mentioned specifically the U.S. military data cables that would go across the ocean, not the internet kind of cables. Well, that was in September, I think, of, 2014, that Bill Gertz broke that on the Free Beacon. And then about a month later, the New York Times got a hold of it, and then they hyped it up as an internet thing. They're coming for your internet. You're free porn.
Yeah.
The Russians are coming to cut it off. So this obviously got people way more excited than just cutting some military cables. and it hyped it all up, right?
Oh man, don't be taking my Pornhub, damn it!
Exactly. People got very upset about that. Military cables, not so much. I think it was 2015, 2016, the Associated Press did an article about, Deb Reichman wrote the article, along with some others, about a scenario where, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, probably 10 years ago, over in Iraq, there were some drones or something that lost connectivity because some anchor dredged up some cable and it cut off the link that the local base had to the handlers back in Nevada or wherever they were actually controlling the drones, causing an outage or reducing the capability in the area, or however they called it. So that's the kind of danger that, the Russians were sort of.
Uh-oh. No, lost him again. Oh, good old Canadian cell service.
All right, so where were we with H.S. Sutton? Oh, yeah, so with Skype.
Yeah, our last episode.
So we stopped recording on Skype. And it's tricky because on Skype, about a minute, 2 minutes later, it'll show up in your chat section and show you it'll show you that there's a recording there and you can download it or listen to it or whatever. And I remember after we hung up with him, I was talking, and we got off the phone with him and we're like, oh man, that was such a great episode. That was so good.
Awesome.
It really
so
was.
Good.
Right? Like, we got so many good things in there. I'm so excited I can't wait to get it edited and posted up there. I cannot wait. And then I'm like, Eric, do you see it in your chat thing yet? And you're like, oh, let me check. No. I'm like, okay, maybe it'll take a second. So we waited a little while longer, still didn't get anything. You went into emailing back and forth with Microsoft, right?
Yeah, I was calling them on the phone and everything, trying to save that episode. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, and we're just...
They were like, yeah, we got it saved. We got it on the cloud backup. We'll just send it to you. And I talked to 4 different people who told me that, and nobody ever sent me shit.
Yeah, so that episode is unfortunately gone. We have our audio.
Yeah.
You back?
I'm going off the cell network, so I thought that would be better than my landline.
It's that Canadian
seems to be cutting
service
it
out there.
Oh man, you have a landline that cuts out? What are you guys on? Like,
I got cable, 250 megabit. It's good. I don't know.
Well, we talk
Usually
shit, but
anyway.
Greg's internet sucks too. So
yeah, mine's only cut out one time so far. Compared to yours twice.
Yeah. So we had this, the cables are all over the place, and is it military cables or internet cables? It's definitely the military cables they're after. I mean, that was the initial reports. That was what they seemed to be stopping over, and I think there was just a whole lot of hype about what they could be doing. And it's like, well, we don't need to hypothesize. We've got the path of the ship that they're saying is the one that's mapping the cable. So let's look at where it goes. And it seemed to stop at places that were not known telco cable sites. It seemed to be stopping at places that were not theoretically important. Evidently, they were important to them, and why, I don't know.
Yeah, because they're looking at cables, right? You can put anything on a cable, and so normally NOAA will put on, seismic. They're trying to look for like seismic activity for tsunamis. They're trying to look for, currents and flow paths for global warming and all this other stuff. So, they can put those cables out there. They generally use the USNS ships, like you talked about, the naval survey ships. But we've also known in the past that they've also used those same ships to lay down cables for SOSIS and IUSS and all these other things, right? Because a submarine's not going to lay that shit. They can't lay cables, right? A carrier's not going to lay those cables. Somebody's got to lay those cables, right? Probably going to be a NOAA ship doing quote-unquote research, right?
Scientific vessels,
Yeah, and so Zeus is usually the one that they try and keep sort of clandestine. And they used to report Zeus's activities in a yearly... the USNS guys, they usually would publish a yearly summary of what their ships have been doing. And about 4 or 5 years ago, Zeus dropped off the list. They just stopped reporting, which ocean it was in, what it was working on that year. It just kind of disappeared. So from an OSINT perspective, it was sort of a flag, like, hey, they're not reporting where it is. Maybe you should go find where it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was stopping over in England, a few years back, and then it was stopping in St. John's a lot. So I'd say it was working somewhere between St. John's and or between Canada and England, which would be Iceland. And then the satellite imagery from Iceland, where of course they were restarting the airbase, suddenly got a new cable installed. So you can see because of course it's Iceland. If you bury a cable, you're going to see that scar on the landscape for a long time, and you can see where the new cable was laid, and you can see where it goes into the ocean. So all this happened at the same time as Zeus was doing its operations in the Atlantic. Was that related? I can't prove it, but it's sure interesting.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And certainly if an old military base is suddenly dusted off and brought out of cold storage, the first thing they're going to need is high-speed internet or high-speed networking back to the DoD in Washington.
So right. You were mentioning about the McCain and the other U.S. destroyer that had the incidents recently, and you mentioned for the one you actually were able to watch it. Now, what exactly do you mean by that? On your account on Marine Traffic, were you able to rewind it and look back on it, or did you watch it live? If so...
I didn't watch it live. It was right afterwards. Sorry, I cut you off.
Well, that's...
Live Rex.
And also, if so, how do you keep track of all this stuff? I mean, I don't know if you're watching on the podcast right now, but I'm showing, I'll zoom out a little bit here, but you can see the entire world, and there's thousands of vessels. So how do you keep track of these things? How do you know what to look for, where the points of interest are, and basically just what to look at?
Yeah, like if you're getting into AIS, what do you recommend?
Right.
Get comfortable with spreadsheets and be very patient. And so for the Fitzgerald, it had its transponder off, so I couldn't actually see what they were doing. So what I was trying to do was look at the area where the accident happened, and of course one of the details that came up in the early morning, late hours of I think it was late Friday or something, was the other ship's name. So I was able to look up what I can't remember if it was a tanker or cargo ship that it hit. I think it was a tanker. Anyway, so I looked up their name, and I could see it plodding along, at 13 knots or something in a generally eastern direction, and at 1:30 or like 1:31 or something, it made a violent move to the right. And I thought, okay, well, that looks like if you were watching a car accident with an invisible car, that looks like what would happen if it was being hit from the north, like with the Fitzgerald heading south.
Right.
Now, I couldn't tell what angle it hit at, because was it, right 90 degrees, 45 degrees? Did it just sort of graze the side and the other ship was trying to get out of the way? I don't know. The post-mortem or whatever they called the investigation afterward into the Fitzgerald showed that it was I think it was more like a 30 to 40 degree hit that the two of them hit sort of bow to bow. But you could watch all this sort of in 3-minute segments as the transponder of the civilian ship was beaconing. And you could see it was going east at 13 knots, and then it started to turn at 1:30. Maybe it dropped to 12 knots or something. And then you could see it drop.
Uh-oh. Oh, boy.
You can see Steffan drop off the podcast.
Well, I know I'm going to have a lot of editing to do after this.
Oh, yeah.
Cut these out and... well, they won't be able to hear it, but anyone listening to the podcast on Libsyn or through any other normal podcast site will not hear any of this.
Yeah, this is just YouTube Live. Sorry if you're on YouTube Live and you're listening to us babble on and deal with technical issues.
But, you know what? I'm just happy it's not my fault this time.
It is
it's
what
not
it
my
is.
internet. But...
when you talk to people who are hanging out at their house on their phone, Steffan is a guy who literally sits at his house and does his stuff at home. So he doesn't have a podcast studio. It doesn't have a dedicated T1 line for doing podcasts. So it is what it is.
Right.
It's one of the deals with going on with OSINT and just open source. It's people at home sitting on their chairs doing hobby, whatever that hobby is. So, it's something we have to deal with. I'm sorry that we have to kind of do this, but we're not all Hollywood actors with $1 million to throw towards a internet connection and everything else.
Right. So. But these people are the most interesting people, though, right? The people who are just sitting at home. They don't have, an office to go into. They don't have a landline like you were talking, or a T1. Do they even do T1, T2, T3 anymore?
I don't know.
I think that was back in the.
I think that was a '90s thing.
Yeah, I do remember that though. Me too. But a lot of these people, like I was talking about Greg Kursak recently. It was just him at home, and he had tons of good information. Again, with Steffan Watkins, there's a lot of really good information that you're not going to get from other people. A lot of other people with offices, with companies, they have everything set up. They're going to be very careful with what they say. And I'm not saying that these people won't be, but I feel like it's much more raw. You get a lot of good information out of it that you might not get from anywhere else.
Right.
Oh, we're back.
Yeah, I'm back.
All right, back again.
I'm trying the wireless again in the house instead of going off the cell network. See if that works. We'll see.
Oh, no worries. We have a track of technical issues, so it is what it is. Everybody seems to be all right with it, so no worries. But one of the things we want to go ahead and roll into, we beat up AIS, I think, pretty good, is open skies. I think that you, to me and to a lot of people, are kind of the guru of open skies and what that is. So maybe you can explain a little bit of what that is, why we need it, why are the Russians spying on us and we let them do it? Like, what is it?
Oh, really quick, too. I love the articles I see every couple months or so from New York Times or Fox News. It seems to often be Fox News, where they will, but it's other people too, but they will say Russian spy aircraft flying over Washington, D.C. right now. And then you start reading it, and it explains to you, like, okay, it's the Open Sky Treaty. This is obviously pre-planned. They know everything that's going on, but they try to scare everyone. So maybe, start out just kind of explaining the basics of it.
Sure. Yeah, so Open Skies was originally an idea of Ike Eisenhower back in the 50s had proposed that after U-2s were being shot down over the Soviet Union, they said, hey, well, why don't we, we'll show you ours if you show us yours, kind of idea. And at the time, that was just laughed out of the room as being some spy plot of the Americans. And, it came back years later when George H.W. Bush brought it back and said, hey, we could use this to alleviate additional stress with Russia between the NATO nations, of course, and Russia. So it wasn't just the Americans and the Russians or the Americans and Soviets anymore. It was everybody. And this treaty was signed off by Bush in 92, and they started flying in 2002. The Russians started flying over the States in 2004 because between 2002 and 2004, they didn't have a plane that was suitable to do the flights. They needed something that was going to be long distance. They could have the certified camera attached to it and all that, and they didn't have that. So we got a head start on them, sort of. While they were overflying Europe with their AN-30, it would be 2004 before they started flying with their Tu-154. The same Tu-154 as they're still flying over the States today. So they haven't updated their plane any, but they have updated the sensor that's on the plane. And so in 2016, that caused a stink with the DIA, because the DIA doesn't like anybody. So the DIA and Tom Cotton and a bunch of others were sort of slandering the treaty as inviting the Russians to come and spy on us, when really it was a completely mutual thing that was an American idea, and that now there's 34 countries signed up to. So each of these 34 countries, it's a 34-way pie. The Russians and the Americans have the biggest piece of the pie as far as how many flights are actually going on. But it's a commission. It's equal. It's 34 nations that all have a vote, and almost everything in the OSCC, the Open Skies consortium that organizes all this, it's always by unanimous consent. So nothing gets done where any one party feels slanted or disadvantaged. So the Americans fly over Russia. Russia flies over the States. The Americans also fly over Ukraine, Georgia, Italy. Like, everybody flies over everybody else. And when you look at it, you're like, well, why are allies Ukraine and Italy flying over each other? And it's because it's a 34-way agreement, and it doesn't split equally, right? You have to have. It's not supposed to be everybody against Russia. It's supposed to be everybody looking at after their own interests in everybody else's country. And a lot of these countries don't necessarily have satellite programs or haven't made the incredible and advanced tech that the Americans have, and want to be able to see something inside Russia. And then maybe that's something that the Americans don't want to share with that country because they aren't, they're an ally, but they're not quite that much of an ally. So this treaty allows every country to overfly with truly limited sensors, whether they're digital or analog, and have a look at something that you may have already known because maybe you were slipped some satellite intelligence from the Americans, but now you want to go back and say, hey, we have proof with a certified camera that Russia and the States and 34 countries all agreed was a tamper-proof camera, and this evidence of whether it's Russian troops in Ukraine or scorch marks from rocket launches or whatever, this is photographic proof that's irrefutable because everybody agreed the camera that was used was certified tamper-proof. So it's kind of the final blow, maybe, to a negotiation or some larger issue. It's not a matter that we're going to fly over Russia and go, ha-ha, we found something that we didn't see with the amazing satellite resolution of the American satellite constellations. We know the Americans have the best satellites in the world, but that's not exactly the point of the treaty. You're going to get unclassified imagery from the treaty, and you're also going to meet the Russian equivalents of the American team and all the other teams and have to deal with them for a week. And it sounds funny, but you're going to get to know them. And then you're going to figure out that, and it's not that we're all going to sit around and break bread and sing Kumbaya or something. It's more that you get a feeling of, are they going to go to nuclear war with us next week? No, Sergei's fine. He's bitching about his wife again. Whatever. You're going to be talking to the same guys. And you're going to get the same war stories. And this is a good thing to get these guys to talking. Because if on a weekly basis you're talking to these guys, or a monthly basis, depending on what country and all that, you get to know them and you get to know what's going on. And it's not exactly human intelligence. It's more peer-to-peer contact. Like you want your military to know those guys and know that they're not about to nuke you next week. And it diffuses things. And if there's any kind of diplomatic problem that's going on, the next time there's an open skies flight over there, over dinner, somebody go, hey, what about that thing I heard about? Oh, no, that's fine. That general, that admiral, whatever, he was just cranky. Whatever. So you get the backstory because these are all professionals. These are all people who have been in the Air Force for decades who have seen it all. And the next time that there's a peacekeeping mission in Georgia or Ukraine or wherever, the Americans that are there are going to know the colonel, the general, whatever, who's on the other side of the border, who's the Russian, who's maybe the, being told to you that they're the aggressor, that there's some crazy person. You're like, no, I saw him last month. He's not so bad.
That's good. It's a good thing, right?
It isn't just the imagery. And people think, oh, no, it's the imagery. We have better satellite imagery. Of course you have better satellite imagery. George H.W. Bush said that they had better imagery. It was never about the imagery. It was about the contact and about the cooperation.
So it was about and
not in a big hippie kind of way.
Right, we can hang out with him and talk to him because when we talked to Greg Kursak, who talked about doing inspections on nukes, he talked about how they would have this nice vacuum-packed cover, and they would still oh no, well there's still some more stuff hidden there, And he could get a feeling if they were. Bullshitting them or not, or if they were agitated with us or whatever. So yeah, I mean, we this is the second time we've actually heard that, which is really interesting. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the acceptance, right? So when we looked online,
we might have lost him. Sorry to cut you off, but
I don't know if we lost him.
Is this thing moving? You there?
Oh, we lost him again.
Yeah, Open Sky. I'm happy we have him on. We can talk about Open Sky. Oh, health check passed. That's a good thing.
Well, I think it's funny because, you see he talked about Tom Cotton and he talks about Ted Cruz. We live in Texas, right? So we have politicians that are trying to kill it, right? So it's nice to know that it's not bullshit. And to me, it didn't really make any sense, right? Because when we talk about, we have a satellite, we have a satellite. We have thousands or hundreds of satellites at this point that are way better, right? That's really nice to know that this actually has some context. So Nice to welcome you back again for the 7th time, Steffan.
But yeah, it's really interesting that you hear a lot of the same things from RimPack.
Right.
Like I made a video on RimPack talking about that, and they talk about a lot of the same things. It's great to form personal relationships with these generals, with people. They haven't had them recently, but a few years back they had China involved in RimPack. And it's nice to actually have... So if there's ever a real-world situation, they can call up this guy personally, and they actually know the guy. And they can say, hey, what the hell, what's going on? Come on.
Exactly. And why would anybody think that the American military on a daily basis leaves super sensitive stuff out that a Google satellite or a Planet satellite or whatever would see as well?
Right.
Like the planes that are flying over the States are taking very limited pictures, only at 30 centimeter resolution, which is about the same as Google. And that's it's really handy in order to confirm something and to get up-to-date imagery, especially if you're doing it on a yearly basis over the same locations. And it's a tamper-proof camera. Nobody could have interfered with anything of it. And you could then use it at the UN, or you could use it across NATO allies and say, hey, we caught them doing this. You may have already known they were doing it, but you didn't have imagery that you could share with everybody to show everybody that they're doing it. There's several, the talking point, Tom Cotton's favorite talking point, is that they're violating the Open Skies Treaty, which is a great word.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything. They're violating. Okay, well, is that a jaywalking kind of thing? Is that murder kind of thing? Like what kind of violation are we talking about? Well, they say they restrict flights over Kaliningrad. True, they do. They started in 2014. There is no justification or no provision in the treaty that lets them restrict the flights to only 500 kilometers. So if you're flying an Open Skies Treaty mission over Russia, the limit is 5,500 kilometers. It's 5,500 kilometers because Russia's huge. And if you're starting off from the Kubinka Air Base and you're flying off to the middle of nowhere, Russia, you need 5,500 kilometers to get there, do your photography, and then come back. But in 2013, I think it was the Polish team, did a lawnmower pattern over Kaliningrad, which is exactly, like as you picture it, lawnmower, back and forth and back and forth. Kaliningrad's about the size of Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Or not Texas.
Yeah.
CT. What's CT?
Connecticut.
Connecticut. There
A little bit smaller than Texas.
So,
a little bit.
There, quite a bit, exactly. It's tiny. So they did this lawnmower pattern because they proposed a flight plan and said, hey, we want to fly this. And the Russians said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, this is the flight plan that we want to do. And the Russians said, well, there's nothing preventing us. There's nothing that we can use to prevent you from flying it, so go ahead. So with the Russian team aboard, I think this Polish team, flew this lawnmower pattern, and the air traffic control called up the Russian government and went, what the hell's going on? Because an open skies flight is like it's like an emergency landing or something. They clear the air for it because everybody's got to get out of the way of this plane as it's doing this treaty-mandated, high-profile, VIP kind of flight path. The problem with that is that if you were trying to land a plane in an area the size of Connecticut, by the time you've lined up with the runway, the Open Skies plane passes right in front of you, and you've got to, break off. And then by the time that you circle around again to land again, the Open Skies Treaty plane comes along your flight path again. So they were having a flight problem with everything that was entering and leaving Kaliningrad because of this flight pattern that was taking thousands of kilometers that were generally intended to travel across Russia and packing it into a really small space, which is technically by the letter of the treaty. So the Russians, I would guess, brought this up at the next meeting and said, hey guys, we got to change this. And they didn't get unanimous support, I believe. I don't have proof of that because I don't have the minutes. And so they said, screw you guys. We're just going to say the next time you want more than 500 kilometers over Kaliningrad, take a hike. And that's what they've been doing. So is it a treaty violation? Yes. They call it flight safety. I say, it's complicated.
Yeah, seriously.
It's definitely, it's not a clear-cut, it's a clear-cut violation as far as they can't just for no reason say you can't travel more than 500 kilometers over Kaliningrad. But on the other hand, they've got to have some way to not disrupt their, all landings, all departures from a small area for an entire day. it's civilian traffic. It's not military related, and there's got to be some compromise there. So I think they should probably get back to the table and talk about that, like diplomats, the way that they have fixed all the other Open Skies treaties violations. So there's been all sorts of issues, like from the beginning of time. From the beginning of this treaty, the Americans have always said that Russia has been in violation of something. And each of these issues comes up, and they get negotiated, and they go away. So we're down to 2 issues. There's that issue with Kaliningrad, and then there's an issue about a border area near the breakaway Georgian republics that I can't pronounce, so I'm not going to try. And this strip is, in Russians' eyes, a strip of land beside 2 independent countries. Only Russia recognizes, or Russia and few others recognize those countries. So the U.S. says, well, that strip of land is just Russia, and it's beside Georgia. And therefore, it is not an area that is subject to this exemption under the treaty. If you're flying an Open Skies flight on the southern border of Texas beside Mexico, the Russians are not allowed to fly within 10 kilometers of Mexico because Mexico isn't part of the Open Skies Treaty. So if you flip that over to Georgia, they can be right up against Georgia's border, which is what the Americans consider the 2 breakaway republics. But to the Russians, those are independent states. Now, whether they are or aren't is more of a political sort of problem.
Right.
And it's nothing to do with the Open Skies Treaty. But yet the Open Skies Treaty is dragged into this because the Russians refuse to have planes 10 kilometers inside their border with these 2 independent, quote unquote independent, depending who you are, nations. So that doesn't have anything to do with Open Skies. It doesn't have anything to do with overflights. This is totally a political border kind of related issue that has nothing to do with it. But those are the 2 pinnacles of the Tom Cotton reason to get rid of the treaty. They're violating the treaty in 2.
Uh-oh. Looks like we lost him again. Open Skies Treaty is incredibly interesting to me because unfortunately, I do not know very much about it. I know there are a lot of restrictions on, for example, what kind of sensors, and as soon as he gets back, I'm definitely going to ask him this question when I get a chance. What kind of sensors you are allowed to have on the aircraft at the time when you're flying over? For example, I've read here that it's limited to 30 centimeter resolution. And for anyone who's not familiar with that, it's about what you're going to see on Google. Oh, you're back?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I'm back. I'm going to see if I can switch to my iPad. All right, keep going.
Well,
so anyway, I think they should just get back to the bargaining table and hash it out like diplomats.
So one question I wanted to ask you: you've been talking about different technologies they have on board on these aircraft, different imaging equipment and stuff like that, and they'll have to be certified. So what exactly is the limitations? Are they allowed to have different signals intelligence equipment on board, or is it very limited to imagery and or SAR, synthetic aperture radar, and that type of thing?
The treaty is future-proofed by saying that you can have whatever sensor you want as long as there's unanimous consent. So the 3 sensors that are currently in the treaty are optical, up to 30 centimeter resolution, infrared, which I'm not sure if it's 50 centimeter resolution or 30 centimeter resolution, but anyway, limited anyway, and synthetic aperture radar. I can't remember what resolution that was. Nobody has synthetic aperture radar installed. I'm not sure if the Russians are technically flying with an infrared camera right now or not. I think it's considered near infrared, so it's towards the infrared spectrum, and they're flying with their digital electro-optical sensor, and it's also treaty limited to 30 centimeter resolution. So it's as good as you can get off of Google Maps or something.
Right.
Oh, and no signals intelligence stuff is aboard the plane. That came up from that was a rumor that was in Foreign Policy magazine a little while back. The author was Zach, if I remember correctly, and I talked to him on the phone actually about it because I had some information for him. And basically, the report that was quoted by Foreign Policy magazine was already debunked internally. But whether the person from the FBI knew that or not was unclear to me. Was this a malicious leak on behalf of some sort of political gain, or was this just they didn't know any better? But basically, the story is that the San Francisco Russian consulate was like some nest of spies. Possible. This nest of spies would, go out, and you have various spies running all over the place, and they'd said that they sent FBI agents after them to see what they were doing, and some of these guys would show up in places that seemed unusual, and did stuff that was unusual, and they were very concerned about what they were doing, and clearly this was nefarious because they were bad people. They were Russians. So these FBI agents, I feel, were primed to be looking for a problem. They didn't know what they were looking at, and so they said, well, the Open Skies Treaty plane is flying overhead, and sometimes we see Russians near where the Open Skies Treaty plane is flying. Therefore, they're clearly communicating with the plane. No. No, they're not. And I can tell you that with great certainty because I know there's a team from DTRA and the U.S. Air Force that crawls all over that plane, inspects it every single time the Russians come to town. There is no way that they could get any signals intelligence equipment hidden on that plane without the Americans finding it. And if they had found it, they would have blocked the flight then and there because it would have been a violation of the treaty. They wouldn't have let it happen. But if you give a bunch of hotshot FBI agents the idea that they're going after a nest of Russian spies, they're going to see whatever they want to see.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they're going to be pretty excited about it, too.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how many people who'll be listening to this have ever tried to take an air photo or a photo maybe that they've taken with their drone and then match it up to a map image and try and, geocode that image so they could point somewhere else on that image and get the coordinates. But one of the ways you do that, of course, is by getting 8 or 7 or 8 points or something on that map to calibrate it so that whether it's with street corners or trees or whatever resolution image you've got, you can then geocode your own air photo. It sounded to me like that was the sort of thing that they were doing. If they were going to be mapping out, like one of the stories was, I think they went to a gas station and the guy walked around with something in his hand, like a phone booth or something, and then he went back to his car and he drove out. What could he possibly be doing? Well, it sounds to me like he was looking at a GPS, trying to figure out what the phone booth's GPS coordinates would be, probably with a Russian satellite instead of an American satellite. So if you were trying to geocode an image afterward, you could validate that the GPS signal and the GLONASS or whatever it is signal are really the same. That's just my best guess from a geocoding perspective. But if you told an FBI agent that some Russian was going to be doing something nefarious, that's what they would see. And that's what the report said, basically, was that these Russians were going off and doing stuff, and there was an open skies flight. So clearly they must have signals or electronic intelligence or something aboard, which is not possible because of the U.S. Air Force and the DTRA guys who inspected every time.
So every time before is it before these flights or after the flights? Either way, they have to. So if a Russian aircraft came here, they're going to inspect the aircraft before it takes off.
Absolutely. And they're going to check it right down to the serial numbers of the radios that are installed on the plane. Like, they can't swap out anything without the Americans noticing that it's not the same part that they had the last time. And it's the same thing that we do when we go over there. They tear apart our plane too.
Interesting. So, I know you're not necessarily here to defend the Open Skies Treaty, but what other reasons are there necessarily for what other reasons are there necessarily? I know you really you talked about the international relations, so you can call up a general, right, and actually know the guy's name, his first name, and you can talk to him, his personality. What other reasons are there? If we're talking about satellite imagery, and say we're gonna just focus on the U.S. and Russia, who both have spy satellites with good enough resolution that can match that, which can be achieved under the treaty regulations right now, at least, for 30 centimeter resolution. What other benefits or what other uses are there for the Open Sky Treaty beyond that? If you're limited to only 30 centimeter and infrared, no signals intelligence, what other uses are there for the treaty?
It would be the unclassified imagery that comes from it will probably be more timely than unclassified imagery that you can get from any other source. And you can say that imagery hasn't been tampered with, and everybody agrees. 34 countries agree that all the cameras, all the methods to transport the digital or wet film Everybody agrees that it's what do you call it, sane, that it's tamper-proof. It's like it's admissible in court because it hasn't been tampered with, right? So you'd bring any of that to the UN, and you could use that as a solid footing for whatever argument you're trying to make. There's like I said, the cooperation element, so that you're getting to know them and getting to know all about them. You want to know what their temperature is. You want to know if they're high strung. You want to know if their boss is chewing them out because they aren't doing a good enough job. This is all good information for later. It can't just be split to the Russia-American angle, because the 32 other countries get more out of it than the Americans do. And that doesn't mean that the Americans don't get anything. It just means everybody else gets a little more, because the American satellite imagery, the national technical means, or whatever they're calling it today, is always going to be better from the States. But it was like that in 1992 when George Bush signed the Open Skies Treaty. You still there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It made a lot of it made a lot of sense to me, because when you have Italy, maybe Italy doesn't have the same type of satellite imagery that we do, but we're already set up for, let's say, Russian intelligence spying or whatever it is. Why not just keep sharing the same information with everybody else? Because it will be, like you said, unadulterated, right?
Right. So I don't see any downside to the Americans allowing the flights to continue, and I see, let's say the Americans get 50% of what everybody else gets, but that's still something that they didn't have before.
True.
It isn't that the satellite can't be swung around and they can't get 6 or 7 centimeter resolution imagery of the Kremlin or whatever. That, of course the American technical means can do that, but it's more the other partners that are going to be able to get that imagery and prove to themselves with their own planes what the Russians are doing, without leaning on the Americans to provide them with that information from American satellites. So it's more to foster independent thought, I guess you could say, between the NATO allies. And the reason why the States needs to stay in it for everybody else is that the Russians are going to pull out of it if the Americans pull out of it, because there isn't going to be much of a for them to be in it if they can't fly over the States too.
Yeah, we saw that with the INF treaty a little bit. It goes back and forth, right? The U.S. claims Russia is violating the treaty, and Russia claims the U.S. is violating the treaty, and once one pulls out, then it's all gone from there, right?
Exactly, but at least with the INF treaty, everybody who's interested could figure out what was going on in the INF treaty, and the speculation being that, of course, the Russians had already fielded a non-compliant missile, that they were developing other non-compliant missiles. This was all fairly, it wasn't shared very well by the Americans, but definitely you get the idea of what was going on there. And there was some truth to it, but for the open sky stuff, they won't mention what the details are of the violations, because, as I told you before, they're complicated. They aren't severe either. And they've been going on for many years, and they have reasons and politics behind them. It isn't like the INF Treaty in respect that there wasn't a severe violation that could be argued that they needed to leave the INF Treaty for it. Right now, there is no severe violation. It's just somebody saying that there are restrictions and violations and throwing out all the buzzwords to get people hyped up, but they never ever explain what those violations are. You know more than anybody else has told anybody about those violations from just listening to this podcast.
So on your Twitter page, you have in your description specifically focused on debunking misinformation about the Open Skies Treaty. What is one of the biggest misinformation facts that you see out there most often?
Oh, easy. And the reporters cannot get this right, including some of the think tankers who I'm trying to figure out who they've been talking to. When you hear Tom Cotton say there's a restriction over Kaliningrad, you could think that that's synonymous with prohibition or blocked or something like that. But he means restriction in the reduce the overall original flight that should have been 5,500 kilometers only to 500 kilometers over Kaliningrad for that air traffic control issue that I mentioned before. That's what he means by restriction. He never wants to tell anybody that because he wants restriction to sound to your ear like prohibition or blocking any of the flights over Kaliningrad. That's what they want people to hear so that they can be outraged and say, well, Russia can't do that. They can't block the states. They're hiding stuff there. They're not hiding. They may be hiding stuff there, but they're not blocking flights there. And that's the pervasive rumor that sort of soaks in. And it was a Hill reporter, I think it was yesterday, that quoted it again as blocking flights over Kaliningrad. Not true. One of the CSIS guys, the think tank, they mentioned he alluded to that they were blocking flights. I can't remember his exact wording, but it seemed rather ambiguous to me, and I thought they could have made it worded a little better, but they didn't want to make any edits. But anyway, it's not a blockage. They're not blocking flights. They're just hampering the flights so that they can be only 500 kilometers. I don't know how to say that better, but it's not a blocking. It's a limiting. It's not necessarily to the letter of the treaty, but the treaty also never expected anybody to try and blow thousands of kilometers over a spot the size of Connecticut. So again, this sounds like something that can totally be negotiated through at the negotiating table. And I don't have the minutes from 2013 or 2014 when the Russians would have brought this up, but it would be incredibly enlightening if that could be accessible via Freedom of Information Act or something, just see what were the arguments. Maybe there was only one group, one out of 34 countries, that wouldn't ratify the change to reduce the flight limit over Kaliningrad to, say, 1,000 kilometers or whatever the bargaining was. I have no idea. But it sounds very negotiable. I mean, it's definitely something that could be handled by diplomacy and doesn't need the U.S. to pull out of it.
So you've talked about these minutes from the different meetings. From the ones that you have got, are there a lot of arguments back and forth about specifications and details and all that in these meetings?
Not usually. WikiLeaks leaked a bunch of stuff from about 10 years ago from State Department cables that were basically meeting minutes of the OSCE meetings or OSCC meetings. And they were kind of interesting because they sounded like any board meeting that you've ever sat at that was really boring and went over a whole bunch of technical stuff and, typical politics and whatever. And I remember there was one of these minutes from the meeting that said that there was, I can't remember where it was in Montenegro or somewhere. And I guess the press showed up to cover the event, but it's a closed door event, but somebody let in the press. So then there was 2 countries that were supposed to not be on speaking terms.
Oh, boy.
Oh. Lost him again.
We did.
Oh, man.
I got a couple more questions already lined up for him. Maybe we can share for the people who are hanging in here.
Oh, man, I think Canadian internet's like North Korean internet. They just shut it off whenever they want. I think we're getting attacked by the Russians or whatever.
Justin Trudeau.
Whatever it is, right?
No.
You always just blame it on the Russians, right? It's always the Russians.
But we can share a little bit with the people who are really hanging in there, and I really appreciate it for these technical difficulties. I do have a few more questions I'm going to ask him. He mentioned a few things about the UN, I should back up a little bit. He mentioned a few things that these imagery and all that stuff could be used at the UN. I was interested if any of this information or any of the imagery from these overflights have ever been released.
I haven't seen any.
I haven't either.
I haven't.
But that's one of the things I'm going to ask him. Oh,
here we go. Back again.
We're discussing our plans for attack on you.
Yeah. It must be the Russians.
Yeah, I'm telling you, see? There you go.
It's always the Russians. You knew that.
Going after Canadians
always
now.
The Russians.
If you're going after Canadians, you got problems.
Yeah.
So, and before I moved, just a little bit of fun background. Before I moved to Dallas here, I lived in Buffalo. I lived literally less than 1 kilometer, because I know you're Canadian. You guys don't go with freedom units. You go with your Celsius and the metric system and everything.
Numbers.
Metric. Less than 1 kilometer from Canada. And I love you guys. You go up there when you're 19 and go drink compared to the U.S. here when you're 21. Yeah. But, I love going up there. Anyway, I don't know. Do you know where you left off? Is there something you want to Continue
I
on.
don't remember where I left
Okay.
off.
Well, I do have a question.
Mhm.
Teacher calling me. All right. You mentioned a few times that some of the image, or earlier on, you mentioned that some of this imagery could be used, for example, at the UN, right? You want to call out a specific incident that was going on. So you're Russia and you overflew the U.S. and you saw something and you want to bring it up at the UN. Has there ever actually been that you know of? Any times that it's actually been done? Have you ever seen any imagery from Open Skies flights that has been declassified or used in such a situation that has been released to the public? I've never seen any.
I've got some. So, in the Canadian Access to Information Act, there's nothing that tells the department what quality they need to give you of the document. So, when they make copies of documents, they take them in black and white, not grayscale, black and white. So the last time that the next time that you use your scanner, instead of scanning something at color or grayscale, pick black and white and see how incredibly horrible it comes out, because it's just black and white. So I've seen some imagery. I see the outlines of buildings. I can get an idea of how close they look, but they look like crap. And I know that they in reality look much better than the copies of the imagery that I have. I think I have some hurricane pictures from a brochure or book or publication or something, because the Open Skies 3D planes, when they're in their off season, if there's a disaster, hurricane, something like that, they will send the Open Skies plane to take imagery of the devastation in order to get up-to-date imagery. Huh. It also means that they don't need to swing around an American spy satellite, and of course they'd want to share that imagery that's unclassified from the plane rather than the satellite imagery. So I can probably dig up some pictures from a hurricane or something, and send that to you.
Huh. Okay. So,
oh yeah, do I know of an incident where it has been used? No, I don't. But there's lots of committee meetings and stuff like that at the UN or elsewhere, whether it's within NATO or whatever. And if you say you had a satellite image that was top secret, what's it, TK, talent keyhole or something, some super high-end satellite image, you can't just leave that lying around your desk. So you have to have it locked up, you have to have it in a special room, you have to have it somewhere else. It's not going to be sitting on your desk. You can't email it to your colleague on the regular DoD network. So it would be easier if you had an unclassified image of the same thing, even if it isn't the smoking gun image. If you need to have like a general representation, or you're trying to get something that you can include in a slide deck, it makes the slide deck unclassified instead of top secret TK. So there's an advantage of having this sort of imagery kicking around that's topical, that may not necessarily be the original image that may have tipped off an analyst, but you have a later image that you can say, here's the burn marks from the missile that we have the picture of from the satellite. So you can then see where something had been, or at least what you're looking for. And then that image can be moved laterally around the DoD a lot easier, shared with reporters, shared with anybody else when you may not be able to share the other stuff.
So I guess my ultimate question when it comes to Open Skies is, why is the USA trying to kill Open Skies? Like, what's the point, right? I mean, we obviously know from talking to you that we're kind of on the leading edge of it, right? We're not getting a whole lot more than what other people are getting from us, but like, why kill it? Like, we know there's advantages at least, but why kill it? Why are people so adamant about trying to shut it down?
Well, there are some very specific people that want it shut down, and they haven't been very quiet, and they've been doing it for a long time. And it's mainly Tom Cotton, and that's the senator for Arkansas. And just recently, last week, was it the 30th? I think Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton tabled a withdrawal resolution in the U.S. Senate to get out of the Open Skies Treaty. These guys are, not to be partisan, I don't think it is partisan to say that Tom Cotton's funded by the military-industrial complex, but mainly by the missile industry. And whenever missile defense comes up, you'll notice that he's at the forefront of saying that, spend more, spend more. And there's a lot of lobbyists that are telling him to say that. And it isn't that he's on the take from the missile industry. It's that he's funded by the missile industry.
Right.
He wants to get elected, and that's the ball that he's got to play. This isn't none of the violations that he's citing are new. Most of his facts are trumped up, and as far as I can tell, it has something to do with the missile industry not wanting, peace, or any kind of treaty or anything that would otherwise impede mass hysteria about Russians. So right now we've got 34 different nations that are visiting Russia, or less than 34, dozens anyway of allies that are visiting Russia on a fairly regular basis, showing that things are generally okay. You're not going to get nuked tomorrow, not next week, probably not next month either. And it keeps everything on the level. That's not good for business. It's much better for Lockheed Martin, McDonnell Douglas, Raytheon, whoever, to keep the world on the corner, on the edge of a precipice, so they can sell more missiles, sell more arms, and all that. If there's no adversary, there is no Cold War, and then there's no sales. So I think they yearn for the days of the Cold War where they could just get blank checks from the military to build as many weapons as they wanted to.
One of the ways I've always looked at it is like a chess game, right? So any advantage whatsoever, no matter what, you got to squash it, right? So if there's maybe there's an airplane that flies over randomly for some treaty or whatever that flies over our manufacturing facility, and we may, for whatever reason, forget to leave something outside that we didn't know was out there. Now it becomes a deal, right? So, in my opinion, the reason that you always see a lot of fighting against this treaty is because it could possibly be a thing that could be used against them in case of a mistake, right? Because you're gonna fly over Air 51 or whatever you want to do, right? You could, if you can pull up the map, Greg, and show them the flight path of open skies.
I already have it up here.
And you could see, whatever. They're obviously not flying over Air 51. I guess they could, but they're flying over military places.
They do.
Real quick,
and they're flying over.
I really want to give Steffan Watkins some credit here, because Eric and I, before we started here, we just Googled images of Russian aircraft, open skies treaty flight paths. And before we started recording here, I asked him, about it, and he's like, "Oh, is that Flight Radar 24 image?" He knew exactly what it was before we started. I mean, I really want to give you credit for that. That was incredible.
Yeah, you were teaching us about the colors and everything. So if you look at the colors, and oh man, that's great.
Yeah. And so going back to the OSINT sort of angle, so on that map, you've got the altitudes of the plane, and you'll notice that they change color when they're over the military bases because they've got to flatten out and be at, I don't remember, 3,000, 8,000 feet, depending if they're doing low, medium, or high altitude photography, which also then changes how wide the swath is. So remember back when they were saying, the Russian plane buzzed the Pentagon or whatever in 2017. So on that same map, you'll see that flight path, and you'll see they go up towards New Jersey. And the next rumor was, they buzzed the golf course where Trump was on vacation. Well, no, not exactly. They were 5 miles away from the golf course.
Oh, we dropped him again. But you can actually we have the flight radar pulled up, and you can see where he's talking about how they buzzed past something in Florida. I'm assuming it's Mayport. Generally, it's probably Mayport. Mayport is the big naval base with submarines and everything else that pulls in and out.
Yeah, it would be really nice if they had the outline of the country, the states, and the cities maps. Maybe it would kind of clutter the map a little bit too much, but they have Washington, D.C. on
here. You can obviously see Norfolk highlighted. You could see probably
right here.
That's probably Charleston, where the nuclear powered stuff is. You got Mayport. You got. I have no idea what that thing is.
I'm pretty sure that would be the ICBM base, the Minuteman bases. But I thought they were a little bit more north.
No, the Minuteman bases are up in Montana and everything else, but.
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Okay, great. So we're still talking about the map here a little bit.
So yeah, they when they flew over Bedminster or whatever the place was called, this golf course, they weren't really over the golf course. That was just all hype in the news because it was close to the golf course, kind of, but it wasn't close enough to take pictures of the golf course, and they didn't overfly the golf course itself. But it makes a good headline, ooh, he's buzzing the golf course, but no, not really.
Let's see.
It
Let's
was
see
a
what
totally legal flight.
Let's see what political figures are walking into this golf course, right? Whatever bullshit you
Well,
throw out there.
37-minute resolution. I don't even know if you wouldn't be able to figure out who it was, let alone probably not even be able to tell if it's a person.
Yeah, but according to like Tom Cotton and everything, it's like super high res. Everything's like super crazy.
Yeah.
30 centimeters.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You couldn't read a license plate.
My favorite person. So in Tom Cotton's legislation, in that legislation that he just proposed with Ted Cruz, it mentions General Stewart and Admiral Haney. So General Stewart, the 3-star, if anybody radicalized me, it would be him. Because in 2016, when he gave his testimony before Congress, I was already interested in the Open Skies Treaty. And I'm like, none of the stuff out of his mouth makes any sense, let alone lines up with anything that I've heard of. What the hell's going on? So I said, I'm a blogger. I can ask the Canadian Public Affairs at our Department of Defense for an interview. Why not? So I talked to a journalist in the States, a good friend of mine, and she gave me some tips and sort of tutored me on what to ask and how to handle this, because I don't usually interview colonels or like lieutenant colonels. And I thought, okay, this is going to be kind of cool. So I had all my questions laid out. I asked them all the questions. They agreed to the interview, which was, first of all, shocking to me, which was awesome as well.
Nice.
Because the Americans don't talk about the Open Skies Treaty at all. And our guys, no problem. Why not? Because it's the Open Skies Treaty. It's unclassified. We do it over there. They do it over here. Everything's cool. So I asked him all these questions about the stuff that General Stewart had testified about. And as he's a Royal Canadian Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, he's not going to directly call out the 3-star general, and he can't make political statements on behalf of the government. But I think from the quotes that I put in my blog post, it's pretty clear what he's saying. And basically, none of the issues that are being brought up are really issues. And none of the benefits that we're getting out of the treaty are even mentioned by the enemies of the treaty, as far as, this sort of cooperation and getting to know them and then understanding, what their sensitive spots are, or, what's been going on in their world. None of that's going to be mentioned by any of the enemies of the treaty. And about the flight restrictions and the DIA saying that they're overflying critical infrastructure and maybe signals intelligence, whatever, it's all bunk. Like none of it's really true. But it was very interesting that I had to sort of navigate this with him to get him. I wasn't trying to get him to say anything. It was that he couldn't say necessarily what he wanted to say. He had to be sort of a little political. So you'll see what I wrote in my blog post. I can send you the link to it. That I've got the exact quotes from him there, and it's not very ambiguous. That he's basically saying that the problems that are being reported are not really problems.
Right. I definitely wanted to highlight your website. We're actually scrolling through your website right now. You probably can't see it, but a vesselofinterest.com.
Yeah.
And then some suspicious Russian writing, some acrylic below it.
Yeah, man.
Oh, yes.
I love it.
It's always Russians.
I love your website, man. It's definitely interesting when it comes to some of the side stuff we don't normally talk about, right? When it comes to like just ships shooting each other or whatever, it is what it is. But when it comes to just general open source intelligence, I think that you've definitely been a guru in my eyes. You've definitely been one of my Yodas. And I didn't know shit about AIS or Open Skies or any of this shit. And you've definitely taught me a lot, man. Like, you've taught me a whole lot about tracking ships and stuff like that, and just looking through bullshit. Because the military, the United States, the state, whatever that state is going to feed you bullshit, right? And so it's really nice to see the different tools that reporters, whatever it is, anybody who's trying to report actual, true intelligence it's really nice, man. And I really appreciate everything that you do, and your website's really nice. So you guys got to check out Vessel of Interest. And the very first story you pull up is about Open Skies. So it's actually got pretty hot lately, just randomly. We didn't even try to talk to you because we were talking about Open Skies. We've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, and it just happened to be when Open Skies started getting attacked. So
we lost them again.
And we lost them again. So it is what it is. If you guys haven't checked out Vessel of Interest, it's an amazing website. So.
Look, you just got a little translator here for whatever language you speak.
Yeah.
Do you speak Bulgarian?
Yeah,
you're going to hear in Bulgarian.
Bulgarian.
Let's go back to English.
Back.
Oh, there we go. Great. We're just looking at your website
the
a little bit.
reappearing OSINT guy.
It's incredible.
It's funny. So we use Zencaster for our podcast.
Are you going to mention
and
that?
You have to type in your name every time you use it.
I was going to mention this.
You type in your name every time you use it, and he's dropped so many times. It started at Steffan Watkins, and it was Steph, and
then
he's
he
misspelled it. He's misspelled it a few times, and now it's just S.
I was actually going to mention
I figured it would eventually get here.
Yeah.
Yes. Each time he's like, you know what? It's been too many times. I'm not going to write out the whole thing anymore.
Yeah,
you misspelled it instead of an F at
I'm
the
just
end
trying
of
to
it.
get back in as quick as possible.
Instead of an F at the end of it, you accidentally hit G. And now it's just S.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was one of the things we talked about was, we talked to people who aren't like, you're not an institute, you're not a college or anything like that. You're just a dude that's hanging out and you have a hobby and you really enjoy this shit. So, you kind of have to expect having technical issues or whatever.
Yeah, but that's a good thing, though. I absolutely think it's a good thing. I think a lot of the institutes or a lot of the organizations you talk to, they have to kind of toe the line, so to say, right? But when you talk to individual people, when we talk to Greg Kursak or when we talked Kursak, got to really put emphasis on that last syllable there. When we talk to other people, you really get their own personal insight onto this, and they can say how they really feel. I've seen too many interviews where it is unfortunately just the organization having to have to toe the line. So I do really appreciate that.
Yeah.
At least we get to really get your insight on it and really get how you feel about it without having to have to deal with all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff.
We talked to the U.S. Navy, and they're like, well, we can't talk about that.
Well, the ship can go 30 plus knots.
Yeah, 30
that
plus.
type of thing. Yeah, not 30. Just everything is 30 plus knots.
900 plus feet.
Yeah. 900. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that's worth noting, that a lot of this stuff that comes up in OSINT is really obvious to the rest of the world, except isn't allowed to be shared sort of internally. Like, you're not allowed to leak a document that's classified, secret, top secret, whatever, of all the locations of, say, the refueling ships. But you can find that out just by looking on AIS. And if you think that a bunch of refueling ships are all going in one direction, there's probably some destroyers and stuff that are going in that direction too.
Exactly.
So a lot of these movements and that, it's just about paying attention.
Exactly. So when we saw the Dmitry Donskoy, so the quote unquote Red October, who's still active, when he for whatever reason that boat transferred on the surface all the way to Navy Day in Sevastopol, and you couldn't track Dmitry, but you could track the tugboats. So you follow the tugboats, and you can follow the tugboats all the way to Sevastopol, right?
Yep. That's the good thing about the Admiral Kuznetsov too.
Yeah,
same thing.
Exactly. Just follow the tugboats. Follow the extra boats that are following it around.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And it's figuring out which of those are significant and which ones aren't. So a lot of the times, I have a hard time figuring out, what's the next exercise that somebody's going to be conducting. And I've gotten the hang of a few of the Russian exercises with India and stuff, so I know when and what to anticipate. But sometimes, they'll leave, and you'll be without a reason for them leaving. You're like, is this planned? Is this not planned? And you're trying to figure out, is it significant or not? And that's where Twitter comes in really handy, because there's a lot of people on Twitter, and a lot of people have read articles, whether they're in Russian or Hindi or some other language, that may have a scoop that you haven't noticed yet, because maybe you're looking on Google or you're looking at DuckDuckGo or whatever your favorite search engine is for English words, and maybe it's not in English. So it's really handy to just throw it out there once in a while and say, hey, I'm looking at this ship, where to go, and then you'll find somebody.
Yeah, actually, when we lost you there for a second, we noticed that on your website, on your webpage here, you have a Google Translator. You can quickly translate it to whatever language you want. Do you ever? So I mentioned there towing the line, right? Do you ever have a concern about that? So we did talk with Strategic Sentinel for a while, and this was right. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but a lot of the OSINT accounts kind of got shut down or warned or faced different situations.
The Indian stuff.
Exactly. Yes. Is there a concern there with you for that as well?
Not really. I mean, concern for their security or for my safety or for getting my account shut down?
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, today it's not even for your own safety, right? It's about getting censored almost. Like, for example, a lot of these OSINT accounts got just shut down and they got banned or suspended until because they said they were violating Indian law.
Yeah, there was some Yahoo who was maybe Indian, could have been, anywhere really. And he was some vigilante kind of guy who was, a proud Indian, hypothetically, or maybe he was a Russian who was pretending to be a proud Indian. Who knows? It's Twitter.
You never know, right? Yeah.
You never know. And so, yeah, they squealed on a bunch of people and got a bunch of people, suspended. Or that was my take. They reported a bunch of accounts, maybe, and then Twitter did further investigation, found some of them had 2 accounts, and then gave them warnings about having 2 accounts, and others were suspended. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on at the same time. But I never got any real confirmation that it was the Indian government exactly that was calling the shots, or whether it was just somebody who was a pissed-off Indian who was reporting these people because they thought they were betraying their,
Oh, boy. There he goes again. The other thing I want to get into here after we get him back, eventually, we got to cover up this topic here. But he talked about the military-industrial complex. He talked about the lizard people. I want to get into conspiracy theories.
Oh, you want to talk about lizard people?
I do. Conspiracy theories is always something I've been extremely interested in. I love them. I love conspiracy theories. I still, since the day I moved to Dallas here, I have not stopped reading Warren Commission reports, the House Select Committee on Assassins reports, declassified CIA documents on the Kennedy assassination.
I'm sure you have video from the grassy knoll, don't you?
I went out there. I've been out there 3 times since I moved there. And you know what? Now, since the weather has kind of calmed down, it's not 115 degrees here in Dallas anymore. I'm going to be going out there again. Personally, I don't believe in any of them for the most part, but I love them. It's like watching a sci-fi movie for me, at least, right? You're watching a movie, you're entertained. You know it's not real, but it's fun.
It's
entertainment.
There we go.
There we go. You're back.
Sorry, we were talking JFK assassination. So.
And we're gonna get there with you in a second.
Right.
Yeah. So might as well just jump into it now, unless you had something to finish up there.
I was just saying that, I try to include as much of the original stuff as I can to, like, links to original documentation so people can see where I came up with these ideas or facts or whatever, and then they can use the link again. So most of the links that I provide are to a ship or to, a plane or something, and they're usually reusable. So you can click the same link and go to the same plane next week or something if you're looking for where is it now.
And that's good. That's great from your perspective. It's very matter of fact. You can check everything you're saying exactly. Right away, and it's not really necessarily up for debate for the most part. What is up for debate?
Yeah, like what they're doing there is always up for debate. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yes. But another thing, what is up for debate is one you mentioned earlier, the military-industrial complex, which is a famous conspiracy theory term. Beyond, I mean, it's a realistic term, but also a conspiracy theory term, right? And along with
have you seen the video of Ike?
Oh, I have, yeah. And I actually made a whole video recently on the military-industrial complex specifically, and I played that video.
Sorry.
What also? Oh no problem. What also goes along with that is what you said in the very beginning of this podcast: is the lizard people.
The lizard people.
The lizard people.
Yes.
Those people. When they find a video of Bill Clinton, right, and he's blinking, and there's some glitch in the codec that they use, right? But they say the eyeballs are blinking horizontally instead of vertically.
I've got to find this now.
Oh, you haven't seen this stuff?
Yes!
Oh, yeah. Anyway, that brings us to one of my favorite topics is conspiracy theories. I love conspiracy theories. I haven't found one that I believe yet. I think they're all kind of BS, but they're so much fun, right? They're so much fun. I love getting into them. Yeah, so
there's like better ones and worse ones. There's like qualities.
The Kennedy assassination. Ever since I moved to Dallas, the Kennedy assassination has been the one for me. Yeah. How do you feel about them? Is that something you're interested in, the old UFO topic or Kennedy assassination or lizard people? Are you completely deep into it?
I'm definitely not into that so much. With JFK, I still don't know who killed JFK. I don't think it was just Lee Harvey Oswald, that's for sure. But I don't know who would have done it. I think the military-industrial complex is just easier for me to say than Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas,
Boeing,
Northrop Grumman, Boeing,
McDonnell Douglas. You're kind of dating yourself.
It's a
Boeing now, but yeah. Yeah,
if you think that there's the military-industrial complex meetings on a weekly basis to figure out what talking points for Trump the next week, I don't think that's quite happening. But I mean, the military-industrial complex is a real thing.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's not necessarily. Well, it's like the lizard people.
Right. Well, the
there are no lizard people running the government.
That's debated whether or not.
But it's a good.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
It's a good term that you can kind of use, right, for this, the shadow government or the Illuminati or whatever.
The military industrial, it's very interesting. While I was doing my research, I had already read about this before, but there was a lady by the name of Kathleen Durham. I can't pronounce her name properly. It's a lady. She worked in I believe it was the Air Force Acquisitions Department. She manipulated. There was a tanker contract. There was a contract for a new glide bomb the U.S. Air Force was looking at procuring. She manipulated all these programs so that Boeing would win. Boeing hired her daughter for I don't want to say the exact amount because I know I'm going to be wrong on it, for a good amount of money. And then after she retired from the Air Force, they hired her on, gave her a huge signing bonus and a huge salary. And they looked into it and they found out there was a whole bunch of corruption, that she manipulated this whole tanker contract to be in favor of Boeing. So it's definitely a very, very real thing, right? And not only is it a thing, but there's definitely some shady things going on behind the scenes. Whether or not it's as large as going after the president, killing Kennedy or something like that, it's a whole other issue. But it's a very, very real thing, right?
Yeah. I don't have any qualms about pointing to them as being sort of a problem because of their influence in politics. They have so much money, they have to do. I mean, the politicians have to play ball, and I don't know that I can exactly blame them, but I don't know when American politics came to, or in some part Canadian politics, how do you con the people to vote for you? I thought the idea was, how do you represent your people rather than how do you con your people to, be your sort of, serfs, and it seems that that's the direction that the American and to a lesser extent Canadian government is going. I think we have we have different styles of government, but it's concerning that people are seemingly being duped into which side to vote for rather than voting for policies.
Right, and you can get into all the political stuff, whether or not this party is influencing or that party is influencing, or if it's the media or this or that. But it's always a topic, for me, like I said, I don't necessarily believe in it. I believe Lee Harvey Oswald was
lizard people.
I believe the lizard people were responsible for killing Kennedy. Oswald was innocent. No, I truly, I've read enough. I've been obsessed with it. And once I get obsessed with something, I just go all out, and it works good for at least what I do. Because I'll focus on one topic and I'll make a video on it. Then the next week I'll focus on something completely different. I get obsessed with different topics. For the most part, it looks like, at least to me, Lee Harvey Oswald did do it alone. But I don't even know where I'm going with this. But
alone, you mean like alone, one gun, just him? Or do you mean like alone, he didn't have any help beforehand?
Well, you can't say that, right? You can't prove a negative. Maybe there was other people involved.
No, but I mean...
But there's no evidence for it necessarily. There's a lot of there's a lot of not hearsay. What's the word for it? Circumstantial evidence. There's not necessarily any proven evidence or physical evidence for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
We need to find a Navy sniper or an Army sniper that can come on the show and be like, yeah, I could probably take this guy out from this window.
Well, I mean, it was only like 80 yards or something.
Oh, it's super short.
Yeah.
I could probably take...
Sorry, Steffan, for you, that would be like
window.
72 and a half meters.
Oh, I think you're more making fun of us than you are him. Because we stupid use feet. But anyways,
I don't know. Do you guys like? Do you know? I don't know if there's ever any jokes about this, but I mean, Australians make fun of me because I say I'm bilingual because I weigh myself in pounds, but speed, as far as cars are concerned, and distance is always in kilometers. But then if I'm measuring something, I'll probably use inches because, depending on, like, if I'm measuring the size of a laptop or something, I'll do it in inches. But if I'm measuring, say, a wall, I'll probably do it in metric.
Right.
So, Canadians are kind of bilingual and flipping back and forth and converting all the time because half our stuff comes from the States and has inches marked on it or feet or, whatever. And the other half of our stuff is metric.
No,
we're all confused.
Yeah, you say it's a joke, but we're the same shit because we get IKEA, so we get shit in kilometers or millimeters or whatever it is, right? When I'm at work, I generally work on like CNCs and stuff that generally deal with really precise measurements and it's you've heard the military use they'll have accidents where the military will use millimeters, but they worked with the Canadians and they used, we used inches and the Canadians used millimeters, and so all of a sudden, we lost a rocket because
there's
been real problems like that.
Right. I forget which one it was, but it was some Mars spacecraft they sent to Mars, and I believe it was actually off because they forgot to translate either metric to imperial or imperial to metric.
Right.
And it was too close to the atmosphere and ended up burning up because of the mix up there.
Happens.
Yeah. But, man, this was an amazing podcast, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, sorry, before we cut off here. Because Eric reminded me a little bit ago. You, we should have covered it earlier, but you mentioned an MMSI number that we can pull up on marine traffic.
I don't remember. Was that Calgary? I think that was Calgary.
Yes, it was a Calgary. Yeah. So this is just a little bit of information for anyone who's interested. You can actually look up this stuff. I mean, has all the spreadsheets. Do you have the number up? Let's see. Do I still have it pulled up?
Yeah.
Oh, I do not have it pulled up. Sorry.
I just used it because it was the first one that I saw that had left
fair enough.
Vancouver. I think it was it yesterday? I think it was. Yesterday, today, something like that.
Is that another?
It's recent anyway.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. Is a lot of the stuff dated that you find too? And do you have that problem? Because it seems like when I'll zoom in on Norfolk or anywhere else in particular, I'll have that problem. It'll say left port X amount of days ago, or it's already dated by then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and depending on where they're headed, if they're headed across the Atlantic, you're probably going to lose contact with them within 100 miles ashore or something like that. And so your next chance to see them will be in Gibraltar, hypothetically, or maybe Scotland, or depending which direction they went and where they're going. So AIS, I mean, it only works as well as the receivers that are hearing it. So to another ship nearby, it'll increase their situational awareness. But if they're in the middle of the Atlantic, unless they turn on their satellite AIS, which is an option, then I'm not going to see it. So it was last year somewhere. Oh, it was right before the Syrian strike that Donald Trump ordered, where they put a bunch of holes in nothing. But they turned out, whatever ship it was some cruiser that was in the middle of the ocean. They turned on their AIS just for a moment. I assume they were meeting up with another ship, or meeting up with a sub, or maybe a helicopter, who knows. But they turned it on just briefly, and what's the name? Lucas Tomlinson at Fox had just said, such and such a cruiser entered the Mediterranean and headed for Syria for the strike. Blah blah blah. Ominous music. And I was like, no, they didn't. I just got them beaconing in the middle of the Atlantic. So he retracted it and said, "Oh, they entered the with the Fifth Fleet, or Sixth Fleet area of operations, not necessarily the Mediterranean, because they start the area of operations before the actual Mediterranean. So they were on the eastern side of the Atlantic, not in the Mediterranean yet, and that was where the confusion was. But these sort of things get reported, and you don't know, are they true? Aren't they? I'm not there. I can't see the ship, and the only way I can see the ship is by its transponder, and that's kind of the tell. But unless Lucas or whoever is actually monitoring where these ships are, he just goes by whatever he heard. And what he last heard to his head was that they entered the Med when really they'd entered the area of operations of is it the Fifth Fleet or Sixth Fleet? I can't remember which ones they run for the Med in
Fifth
Europe.
Fleet is Middle East, but I believe that is in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, I could tell you. But so what you're telling us is when you retire, you're going to be hanging out off of some port somewhere, taking pictures of ships flowing in and out.
That'd be pretty good.
Man,
That'd
I think
be pretty good. I gotta say, maybe Halifax or something.
I hate to say it, but I think those retired guys that just hang out on their $1 million house off the in their back patio, taking pictures of whatever ship pulling out of port, they probably have the best life. I think. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I'd say it's up there.
No, it's
definitely up there.
Yeah, definitely got to be up there. But man, thank you for so much for coming on, man. Like we've had an amazing podcast. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties, and I know it's gone both ways.
I'm sorry. I don't know if it's my end or what.
Yeah,
but,
it's all your fault.
Well, like your buddy said, maybe the Android app is not as hot as it seems.
I think we're getting attacked by the Russians. That's what we're going to blame it on.
That or the Pakistanis.
No, that's what we're going to go for. Okay.
Pakistanis? Okay. Whatever it is. Whatever. Insert
the Indians.
Insert X state you hate. Regardless of who we don't like, and then
whatever country you as a listener do not like, that's the one that's messing.
That's who we're blaming it on. So
we'll go there. Well,
can you blame Al Qaeda?
Yeah, well,
I don't know. Does anyone blame Al Qaeda anymore?
Anybody?
You've fallen out of fashion.
But seriously, really, thanks for being on.
Much appreciated, guys.
It's been a lot of fun. You've been a really fun guest. Yeah. Not just informational, but fun.
Yeah, anytime we actually get
Happy
to laugh.
Be here. Thank you guys very much for having the podcast.
Yeah,
definitely, and
it's really good to have a podcast you can come on and chew the cud like this.
No, that's man, awesome. Definitely. Yeah, we want to try to give everybody a free and open spot to just bullshit with us and not have to worry about towing some line or, just filling in that bullshit that they have to fill in. Like we want to try to understand what's going on. We're just fans of the military / whatever you want to put in there.
We're fans of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, there you go.
All of us.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, we're not necessarily non-pro. We're not necessarily pro-nuke or whatever it is you want to look at it. But we try to give a balanced view of everything. So it's really nice to have you on here and show us about what's going on with
pro-truth than anything else. I just like, if we're going to, like they're talking about, the Trump and the oil and all that in Syria. I just wish they'd be straight with us. Like, tell us what's actually going on.
Absolutely.
Explain to us what the issues are with the Open Skies Treaty. Why really do people want to bail on it? Why are they letting us struggle to try and scrape together these bits of information through open source information and leaks? But they could just tell us.
And that's why
big boys,
and
girls,
and that's why it's great to have people like you, especially you, but other people as well, to call them out. And I don't mean to get too political, but whether it's Trump or whether it's the right or the left in America, it doesn't matter. Somebody to call out the people in power and say, look, that's BS. That's not what's going on. I can look at the thing right here, and that's not where it is. New York Times or whoever it is,
exactly.
You're wrong. And that's what's extremely important. So thank you so much for being on. If we don't have anything else, I think we're about to wrap up.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and that wraps it up for this week.
Thank you for having me.
All right, man. Thank you for joining us.
Have a good night. Okay. Bye-bye.
And live stream.